My nephew caught a glimpse of me in a miniskirt, and what followed was unexpected. This is a tale of infidelity, a true story that unfolds in surprising ways. My nephew saw me in a miniskirt and did something I hadn't expected, but I didn't mind. Life can be peculiar in that way. One moment, everything seems quite mundane, and the next, you find yourself in an unexpected situation. The day was intended to unfold like any typical Saturday, filled with mundane chores, yet I have come to realize that some days, everything can shift dramatically. The afternoon sun streamed through the living room windows, casting a warm, golden hue over the hardwood floor. The house lay in stillness, save for the soft hum of the dryer working diligently in the laundry room. I had just completed the task of folding a stack of towels and was on the verge of organizing the closet, a chore I had been avoiding for weeks. It's one of those tasks that appear straightforward, yet inevitably transforms into a substantial undertaking the instant you dive in. I stepped inside and pulled open the closet doors. Immediately, a sense of regret washed over me as I took in the chaotic scene within. Garments I hadn't touched in ages were merely draped on mismatched hangers. The hues had dulled from years of neglect. Boxes of random knickknacks teetered precariously on the top shelf, while shoes I couldn't recall ever owning lay scattered haphazardly across the floor. With a sigh, I rolled up my sleeves and began sorting it all out. I stepped into the bedroom and pulled open the closet doors. What I saw took me by surprise. It was filled with a great deal of disarray. I hadn't donned some of those garments in years. The hangers were mismatched. The hues had dulled, as I had neglected to wear them. On the top shelf, there sat an assortment of boxes filled with various odds and ends. Several pairs of shoes were scattered across the floor. I let out a deep breath. I began organizing the clothes into distinct piles. I intended to retain a few, distribute others, and dispose of the rest. I was halfway through when I stumbled upon a skirt I hadn't laid eyes on in years. It was a short skirt. It gleamed with a deep, lustrous black finish. It reminded me of my younger, more carefree days. I wore that skirt when I went out dancing at night, and didn't wake up with sore joints in the morning. It brought to mind my younger, wilder days. I raised it high. I took a glance, both entertained and intrigued. Can it still fit? I hadn't worn anything that short for years, but the skirt brought back memories of who I once was. On a whim, I chose to give it a go, out of sheer curiosity. Who would have imagined that I would find myself revisiting those wild times again because of a piece of clothing? I found myself taken aback. I felt a sense of ease embracing my shape, and I experienced a mix of embarrassment and curiosity about how that experience. I turned to face the mirror, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the reflection staring back at me. The woman in the mirror appeared bold and confident, a stark contrast to the person I knew, who had devoted the past few years to the grind of routines and responsibilities. I smoothed the fabric down over my thighs, and a small laugh escaped me. "Still got it?" I whispered, my cheeks burning with the boldness of it all. I felt quite at ease and somewhat ashamed, embracing my shape. I gazed into the mirror and found myself confronted by a stranger reflecting back at me. She appeared daring and self-assured, a stark contrast to the individual who had devoted the past few years to monotonous routines and responsibilities. I began to chuckle as I smoothed the fabric down over my thighs. I still possess it, I mused, even as my cheeks warmed at the boldness of the notion. I was just about to slip back into my comfortable sweatpants when the doorbell chimed. I froze, my heart skipping a rhythm. Who might that be? I wasn't anticipating anyone's arrival. Initially, I felt compelled to dismiss it, yet the bell chimed once more, this time with greater urgency. With a sigh, I picked up a loose cardigan from the bed and put it on, hoping it would at least somewhat tone down the outfit. When I opened up, I was on the verge of slipping into my pajamas when the doorbell chimed. My heart raced with excitement. Who on earth might that be? I wasn't anticipating anyone. I wished to dismiss the bell, yet it chimed once more, this time with greater insistence. With a resigned breath, I snatched a loose cardigan from the bed and draped it over my shoulders, wishing it might somehow soften the impact of my outfit. As I prepared to open the door, a familiar face greeted me. Liam, my 21-year-old nephew. He had transformed from the slender youth I once knew. He had developed into a capable young man, possessing broad shoulders and a relaxed charm that appeared to flow naturally. He stood on the porch, a bag of tools draped over one shoulder, a crooked smile playing on his lips. "Auntie," he said, his voice filled with warmth and playful banter. "You reached out regarding the sink that is leaking. Do you recall the sink?" I had entirely overlooked that. I encountered a familiar face, my nephew Liam, currently a 21-year-old. He had transformed from the slender teenager I once knew. He had matured into a capable young man, possessing broad shoulders and a relaxed charm that appeared to arise naturally. He stood on the porch, a bag of tools draped over one shoulder, and a lopsided grin on his face. "Auntie," he said, his voice filled with warmth and playful banter. "Did you reach out regarding the sink that's leaking?" I inquired, attempting to recall the sink I had entirely overlooked. He replied, "I had forgotten too." My mind raced, searching for a response, but Liam's gaze dropped, and in that fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of uncertainty in his expression. His gaze lingered for just a moment too long, before he swiftly averted his eyes. His cheeks flushed a subtle shade. "Oh right," I said, moving aside to allow him entry. "Thank you for your presence. The restroom is located down the hall." As he walked by, an unusual tension enveloped the atmosphere. It was something elusive, something I couldn't quite identify, yet it was undeniably there. Dee requested that he come over. My thoughts surged as I struggled to find the right words, but when Liam glanced away for just a moment, I caught a glimpse of his expression falter. He glanced back at me for a brief moment, then swiftly turned his gaze away once more. "Oh right," I replied, moving aside to allow him entry. "Thank you for your presence. The restroom is located at the end of the corridor." As he moved by, I sensed a delicate change in the atmosphere. It was elusive, just out of reach, yet undeniably present. I brushed it aside, believing it was merely my own self-awareness. After all, I wasn't exactly dressed for company, and in that moment I found myself questioning whether I had chosen this skirt unconsciously because of him. However, I shook my head. That simply cannot be the case. Liam began his task on the sink as I returned to the bedroom to wrap up my closet project. As I rummaged through the old clothes, an unsettling feeling lingered, suggesting that something was amiss. A delicate change was in the air, yet I couldn't quite identify its source. I believed it was only my own secret, yet I found myself dressed for an audience, reluctant to confess that this skirt was selected with him in mind. Yet, I shook my head and reminded myself that can't be right. Liam began his task on the sink as I returned to the bedroom to continue with my closet project. As I sifted through the old clothes, a sense of something unusual washed over me. A peculiar energy filled the house, heightening my awareness of every sound and movement. I attempted to push it aside and concentrate on my task, but then Liam's voice echoed from the bathroom, shattering my focus. "Auntie, could you assist me with the sweater for a moment?" I strolled down the corridor and entered the bathroom. Liam was crouched by the sink, his sleeves rolled up to reveal his strong forearms. The atmosphere in the house felt strange. The atmosphere held a certain quality that heightened my awareness of every sound and movement around me. I attempted to push it aside and concentrate on the task before me, but then Liam's voice pierced through the silence from the bathroom, disrupting my focus. "Auntie, could you lend me a hand with something quickly?" he remarked, clutching the sweater I had been folding. I strolled down the corridor and entered the bathroom. Liam was crouched by the sink, his sleeves rolled up to showcase his strong forearms. He held a wrench in one hand. The cramped space seemed to shrink further with both of us inside, and I struggled to resist the impulse to retreat. "What's going on?" I inquired, maintaining a cheerful tone. "I believe the pipe is jammed," he remarked, gesturing toward the faucet. "Could you please hold this for me while I attempt to loosen it?" I leaned in, nodding as I reached for the faucet, following the instructions given. As our shoulders brushed during his work, an unexpected warmth radiated from him, catching me off guard. The closeness was about the dimensions of a matchbox, and the area seemed even more cramped with the two of us inside. I had to resist the temptation to pull away. "What's going on?" I inquired, maintaining a cheerful tone. "I believe the pipe is jammed," he remarked, gesturing towards the faucet. "Could you please hold this for me while I attempt to loosen it?" I leaned in, nodding as I reached for the faucet as instructed. As our shoulders brushed while he worked, an unexpected warmth radiated from him, catching me off guard. The closeness was innocent enough, yet the atmosphere surrounding us felt electric, as if we both sensed the significance of our nearness. Liam cast a fleeting glance in my direction. His gaze held for just a heartbeat before he turned away. "You look nice today," he said casually, though his voice carried a hint of something I couldn't quite identify. "Thank you," I responded, my cheeks turning red. That it's merely an old skirt I discovered tucked away in the closet. I was goy. "In order to donate it looks good on you," he remarked, a subtle smile playing at the edge of his lips. That I chuckled softly, sitting up straight as he completed tightening the final bolt. "It's all done," he said, rising to his feet and wiping his hands on his jeans. "That it should be as good as new." "Thank you." I stepped back to give him some space. "You're a lifesaver," Liam said, leaning against the counter. His eyes were locked onto mine. "I don't believe I've ever seen you in something like that before." I ceased my movements. I found myself at a loss for words. His tone lacked any hint of playfulness. It was gentle, nearly contemplative. I found myself tugging at the hem of the SKT, suddenly feeling a wave of self-consciousness wash over me. "It's merely something I mentioned a while back," I added swiftly. "Nothing remarkable." He remained silent for a moment, simply gazing at me with an expression that eluded my understanding. Then he smiled, his familiar, relaxed grin reappearing. "It suits you well," he remarked, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, weightier than they ought to have been. I hurriedly exited the bathroom, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't fully grasp. I nervously toyed with the hem of my SKT, a wave of self-consciousness washing over me. "It's merely something I mentioned in passing," I added hastily. He replied with nothing special, pausing for a moment, his gaze fixed on me, wearing an expression that eluded my understanding. Then he smiled, his familiar, relaxed grin reappearing. "It suits you well," he remarked, his voice barely above a whisper. The words lingered in the air, weightier than they ought to have been. I swiftly pivoted to exit in the bathroom. My heart raced for reasons I couldn't quite grasp. Yet, as I ventured into the hallway, I sensed Liam's presence just behind me, his footsteps mirroring my own. "Auntie," he said, his voice halting me in my steps. I turned to face him, my breath hitching as our gazes locked. "Indeed." He paused, as though he were in pursuit of the perfect expression. "Have you ever sensed that events unfold for a purpose?" Liam's question lingered, thick with unvoiced significance. I hesitated, caught off guard and uncertain of my reply. "What do you mean?" I inquired with caution, making an effort to conceal my doubt. To maintain my composure, he paused, his eyes darting to the ground before locking onto mine once more. "Sometimes, it seems that events unfold as they are meant to, even if we don't grasp their significance right away." His words carried a heaviness that disturbed me, and I managed a small laugh, trying to dismiss it. "You've been diving into those philosophy books a bit too much," I joked, stepping. She moved past him, heading towards the kitchen. "Come on. Let me get you something to drink before you go." To maintain my composure, he paused, his eyes darting to the ground before reconnecting with mine. "Sometimes, it seems that events unfold as they are meant to, even if we don't grasp the reasons initially." His words carried a heaviness that disturbed me, and I managed a faint laugh, trying to dismiss it. I playfully remarked, "You've been diving into too many philosophy books." Moving past him towards the cooking space. "Come on, let me get you something to drink before you go." Liam trailed behind me as I exited the bathroom, and I made an effort to push aside the palpable tension that lingered in the air. I retrieved a glass of water from the cabinet and offered it to him. "Thank you," he remarked, accepting the glass yet refraining from taking a sip. His gaze was fixed on me once more, examining me in a manner that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're always welcome here, Liam," I said, leaning against the counter. "You understand that, don't you?" He simply shrugged, placing the glass aside without tasting it. "I suppose I simply didn't want to intrude." "You're not bothering me," I stated with conviction. Even as a hint of uncertainty crept in, was he sensing my discomfort? Had he detected the change in the atmosphere that I was desperately attempting to overlook? Liam nodded, yet his expression stayed inscrutable. He looked at the clock, then turned his gaze back to me. I ought to. You're always invited to join us, Liam. You understand that, correct? He said, shrugging and setting his glass down without taking a sip. That I suppose I simply didn't want to trouble you. You are not bothering me, I stated, attempting to assert myself, yet a sense of uncertainty lingered within me. Was he sensing my discomfort? Had he perceived the change in the atmosphere that I was desperately attempting to overlook? Liam nodded, yet his expression stayed inscrutable. He looked at the clock, then returned his gaze to me. I suppose it's time for me to head out, he finally remarked. Thank you for allowing me to assist with the sink. Absolutely, I remarked, feeling a sense of relief wash over me as I found a reason to conclude the discussion. Drive safe, he said, offering me a faint smile before moving toward the door. Yet, just as he grasped the handle, he hesitated and turned back to glance at me. Auntie, he started, his voice gentle. For a brief moment, he appeared to grapple with his thoughts. Then he shook his head and released a soft chuckle. Forget it, I'll catch you later and just... He simply got up and walked away, the door clicking shut in his wake. I lingered for a moment, gazing at the vacant spot he had occupied, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. There was an unarticulated connection between us, a feeling I couldn't fully identify, yet it was impossible to ignore. It was disconcerting, perplexing, and I loathed the emotions it stirred within me. I believed it was finished, but alas, this was merely the start. I had never anticipated what would follow. I attempted to banish the thoughts from my mind, standing there for a moment, gazing at the vacant spot where he had been, my thoughts swirling rapidly. There was an unarticulated connection between us, an essence I struggled to define, yet it was undeniable. It was disconcerting, perplexing, and I despised the emotions it stirred within me. I believed it was the end, but alas, this was merely the start. I had never anticipated what would follow. I attempted to banish the thoughts from my mind and return to my tasks, engaging in anything that might divert my attention. Yet, despite my relentless efforts, Liam's words and the intensity of his gaze lingered in my mind. That night, as I settled onto the couch with a cup of tea, I finally permitted myself to unwind. Consider it. Did I overreact? Had I misunderstood his intention? Liam was everything to his family. Surely he didn't intend any harm, yet the recollection of his lingering gaze remains. I immersed myself in my chores, attempting to divert my thoughts, yet no matter how diligently I toiled, my mind kept drifting back to Liam and the way he had gazed at me. That night, I finally permitted myself to ponder it. Did I overreact? Had I misunderstood his intentions? Liam was everything to the family. Surely he didn't intend any significance, yet the recollection of his lingering gaze, the gentle cadence of his voice, and the pause in his words lingered on, unwilling to dissipate. Just as I began to reassure myself it was nothing, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up and my heart skipped a beat when I saw Auntie. Can I ask you something? Upon the display. I gazed at the message, my thoughts swirling. Why was he messaging me at this moment? What could he possibly want to inquire about? After a brief pause, I crafted a straightforward reply. The gentle cadence of his voice and the pause in his speech revealed that there was something up. Just as I was beginning to dismiss it as nothing, my phone vibrated on the coffee table and I grabbed it, and my heart raced when I noticed Liam's name on the screen. Hey Auntie, may I inquire about something? He composed. I gazed at the message, my thoughts swirling. Why was he messaging me at this moment? What could he possibly want to inquire about? After a brief pause, I crafted a straightforward reply. Absolutely. What's on your mind? His reply came almost instantly. I find myself constantly pondering. Today, you appear changed. It caught me off guard. I suppose. My stomach churned as I absorbed the message. Distinct. How I typed back. Yet a part of me hesitated, reluctant to uncover the truth. There was a lengthy silence before his next message came through. I'm uncertain. You appeared so self-assured. Almost as if you were radiating a certain light. I stared at the screen, filled with uncertainty. How to reply. I found myself reflecting on how you appear today, and I must say it caught me off guard. I responded with a neutral comment saying you look different. As I read the message, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Different. How I typed back. Even though a part of me didn't want to know the answer. A lengthy silence ensued before his subsequent message materialized. I'm not sure, but you appeared so self-assured, almost radiant in a way. I stared at the screen, uncertain of how to reply. Was this a simple compliment? Or was there a deeper meaning behind it? My fingers lingered above the keyboard, contemplating the best way to respond. Ultimately, I arrived at a choice that felt balanced, that I was merely experimenting with. Worn garments, nothing too significant. He read the message right away, and I observed the typing bubble pop up and vanish multiple times. When his response finally came through, it took my breath away. You looked fantastic, I truly mean it. My heart raced within me as I gazed at the words. This was not typical. This was not. I am not. I'm not certain whether this is merely a kind remark, or if there's something deeper behind it. I paused over the keyboard, searching for the right words to respond. Ultimately, I came to a decision. I was merely trying on some old clothes, nothing too serious. He immediately read the message. I observed the typing bubble materialize and vanish multiple times. When he finally responded, it took my breath away. You appeared quite impressive. I truly mean it. My heart raced within me as I gazed at the words. This was not typical. This was not the sort of remark a nephew might make to his aunt, and yet I found myself unable to dismiss it entirely. I responded with a simple thanks, Liam. How kind of you to express that. I trust that this will be the conclusion of the matter. Yet, beneath the surface, I understood it wouldn't be. Sure enough, another notification appeared moments later. I'm not sure if I should express this, but I experienced something today. Did you? My breath hitched, my fingers quivered as I absorbed the message. I sensed I was venturing into perilous ground, and I was uncertain about how to navigate it. Liam was more than just a person, he was family. Whatever he believed he was experiencing, it didn't feel correct. Yet, rather than silencing him right away, I felt a moment of pause. At last, I responded to him, Liam, I believe you're mistaken. Your emotions are merely illusions, simply out of place. His response arrived swiftly, perhaps, yet I can't shake it from my mind. I apologized. I began to sense that I was venturing into perilous ground, and I felt uncertain about how to navigate it. Liam was more than just a person, he was family. Whatever he was experiencing, it felt off. Yet, rather than dismissing him outright, I felt a moment of pause. At last, I responded to him, I believe you're mistaken. Your emotions are merely illusions. It's simply out of place. His response arrived swiftly, perhaps, yet I can't shake it from my mind. I apologize if this causes you any discomfort. I feel it's important to share this with you. I placed my phone aside. My hands trembled. The room seemed to chill, and the air grew dense. What began as a straightforward trip to repair a sink had evolved into something I found difficult to grasp. I hoped Liam would be able to release it, that he would transcend whatever this situation was. As I sat there, gazing at the unanswered message on my phone, an unsettling sense washed over me, hinting that this was merely the start of something much larger. If this makes you uneasy, I must share that I set my phone aside, my hands trembling, and the atmosphere grew chillier while the air felt denser. What began as a straightforward trip to repair a sink had evolved into an experience I found difficult to grasp. I hoped Liam would let it go, that he'd move beyond whatever this was. But as I sat there staring at the unanswered message on my phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The following morning, I awoke with a weighty sensation in my chest. The sunlight filtering through the curtains felt unwelcome, as if it were casting a spotlight on all the things I preferred to avoid. Liam's messages from the night before echoed in my thoughts, cycling endlessly like a melody trapped on loop. I believed that by ignoring him, the peculiar tension would dissipate, yet the silence only intensified it. I occupied myself with my customary tasks. The following morning, I awoke with a weighty sensation in my chest. The sunlight filtering through the curtains felt unwelcome, as though it were casting a spotlight on all the things I preferred to avoid. I found myself lost in thought, mulling over Liam's messages from the previous night, replaying them endlessly in my mind like a broken record. I had believed that by ignoring him, the peculiar tension would dissipate, yet the silence only intensified it. I sought solace in the familiar rhythm of the day, coffee brewing, laundry tumbling, and the kitchen being put in order. Yet, from time to time, I found myself stealing glances at my phone, a mix of dread and anticipation swirling within me for another message from Liam. By mid-morning, I had persuaded myself that perhaps it was finished, that he had come to his senses and chosen to move on. Suddenly, a knock echoed through the room. My stomach sank. It was too early for mail. And I wasn't anticipating anyone else. I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I was seeking a sense of normalcy in my day, engaging in activities such as enjoying a cup of coffee, tackling the laundry, and organizing the kitchen. Yet, from time to time, I found myself glancing at my phone, a mix of dread and anticipation swirling within me for another message from Liam. By mid-morning, I had persuaded myself that perhaps it was finished, perhaps he had come to his senses and chosen to let go. However, a sudden knock echoed through the room. My stomach sank. It was too early for mail, and I wasn't anticipating anyone else. I experienced a sense of unease. A jittery excitement coursed through me as I approached the front door. As I opened the door, there he stood, Liam, on the porch, his hands buried deep in his pockets. His stance was relaxed yet hesitant. "Is that you, Liam?" I exclaimed, my voice revealing my astonishment. "What brings you here?" "I was just in the neighborhood," he said swiftly. His words flowed quickly but lacked conviction. "I was just considering a quick visit." I gazed at him, attempting to decipher his expression. Yet it remained concealed. "Do you reside here?" I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me as I approached the front door. As I opened the door, there he stood, Liam, on the porch, his hands buried deep in his pockets. "Liam?" I exclaimed, my voice betraying my astonishment. "What brings you here?" "I was just in the neighborhood," he said quickly. His words spilled forth. Lacking the weight of conviction, I was contemplating a quick visit. I gazed at him, attempting to decipher his expression, yet he remained elusive. "You reside just 20 minutes away." I gestured, moving aside to allow him entry. "Since when have you been visiting this neighborhood?" He shrugged, turning his eyes away from mine. "I wanted to reach out and see how you're holding up." I shut the door after him. I experienced a sense of discomfort and irritation. "I'm perfectly okay," I replied, folding my arms across my chest. "You might have sent me a text." Indeed, he surveyed the room, his movements betraying a hint of restlessness. "I simply had to lay my eyes on you." My heart raced. "Let's take a step back." I was on the verge of expressing something when I experienced this. Anticipation hangs heavily. I glanced at Liam, and he met my gaze. I inhaled deeply and said, "Liam, we need to have a conversation." He gazed at me, then shifted his gaze away, only to return to me once more. "Your comments from last night were quite inappropriate. You are my nephew, Liam. No matter what you're experiencing, it doesn't seem correct." "I understand," I replied. "I keep repeating that to myself, yet it doesn't alter a thing." With a clear voice echoing in my thoughts, I began to express myself more assertively. "Liam, we need to have a conversation." He gazed at me, then shifted his focus back, as though attempting to decipher my thoughts. "Indeed," I replied, inhaling deeply. "Your comments from last night were not suitable. Liam, you are my nephew. No matter what emotions you're experiencing, they don't seem to align with what's appropriate." "I understand," he spoke rapidly, his tone tinged with irritation. "I keep repeating that to myself. You are attributing something to me that doesn't exist." He moved in, his voice low and intent. "I find myself constantly reflecting on you, Auntie. You are everything." His words struck me with the force of a gut punch. My thoughts raced as I searched for the perfect words, something that would put an end to this without causing him any harm. "Liam, pay attention to what I'm saying." I shook my head and stepped back slightly, as though putting some distance between us could ease the tension lingering in the air. "It seems you're experiencing some confusion. You are conveying an illusion that doesn't exist." "It seems genuine." He inched nearer. "I find myself unable to stop pondering over you, Auntie.